And the reason for that is, I don't care how big and tough and mean and dominant and oppressive you are, two slightly less mean, oppressive, and dominant males can take you out pretty easily on a bad day. And that's a real problem. You think about that biologically. That's a non-trivial problem. And so that is exactly what happens in chimpanzee troops, is that the males who rise to a position of authority as a mere consequence of their psychopathic will to power rule very unstably over very unstable troops and have a very short ruling period. Whereas the males that manage to, because in chimps, the fundamental hierarchy is male dominated. It's less obvious in another set of very close primate relatives, the bonobos. They're more female dominated, interestingly enough, and it isn't obvious which of those two species were more like. But I'll concentrate on the chimps now because we're talking a little bit about will to power. The males who manage to maintain a relatively stable coalition, let's say, are actually very affiliative. In fact, they groom other males more than any other males in the troop. And so they're using reciprocal altruism, at least in part, as the basis of their claim to dominion. Now, they do have preferential mating access to females, and that there's some analogy in that with what happens in the human case, but it's more complicated in the human case. In any case, they also tend to spend a fair bit of time attending to the females in the troop in a positive way and to their infants. And so the more benevolent, but still physically able males seem to establish a stable social hierarchy that's quite unlike the social hierarchy that's produced by the, more psychopathic, straight, raw will to power. And here's another fact for what it's worth. If the hierarchy that we use to aggregate the canon is fundamentally predicated on oppressive power, which is the claim, then why do psychopaths only constitute 3% of the population? And that's actually stable. And so there are good evolutionary biology, psychology models of psychopathy. Its emergence and stability has been modeled quite nicely in computer simulations, and such simulations can be used as appropriate models. If the psychopath prevalence falls below 1%, there's so few of them that people get complacent in relationship to the possibility of malevolence. And so then they can flourish a bit, right? And their prevalence can rise in the population. But if it gets up to 5%, it's like everybody wakes up, and it's not such a good day for the psychopaths when they do. And and somebody has to keep the malevolent types down, and that's probably, possibly, we'll say, why women like men who are less agreeable than they are. And women have to solve this very complex mating problem in relationship to men, which is, there are bad men. They're really bad. And they're a minority of the population. And they tear their way through overly agreeable populations. And to keep them from dominating, you need good men who are also capable of being quite terrible. And so that appears to be the conundrum that women face when they're choosing male partners, one of the conundrums. They want someone who's strong enough to resist what's truly terrible, but benevolent and generous enough and productive enough to be productive and useful, but also agreeable and empathic enough to share. And you can see that that's a terribly tight line, right? And women are always, young women tend to overshoot the mark on the malevolent side. So the psychopathic Machiavellians who mimic competent male behavior, they ape it, so to speak, are differentially attractive to young and inexperienced women. Whereas women who've had some experience get better at distinguishing the psychopathic Machiavellian pretenders who often manifest a certain confidence and a certain bravado. They get good at distinguishing them from the real thing. And so it's a tricky thing for women to manage, and men can use deceptive strategies to mimic competence, which is exactly what deceptive strategies are for, obviously. And that's also a pathway to short-term mating success under some circumstances. and it's viable enough to propagate itself in the population, but it's not a good medium to long-term strategy.